Shalom Aleichem. We are exploring the Sichas, volume 16, Tazayin, the Sicha of Vaera. When you read the Haggadah on Pesach night, so we have the section after we read the 10 Makas, the 10 plagues, and Rabbi Yehuda gives a sign, the Tzach Hadash Ba'achav. We then have 3 paragraphs which seem very technical. And there's a whole calculation of how many plagues there really were. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says there were 10. And then there were 50 at the sea. Rabbi Eliezer says there were 40, because each one consists of 4. And he brings a verse to prove it. Rabbi Akiva says there were 50, because each one of the 10 consists of 5. And he brings a verse to prove it. If you're like me, when you come to that place in the Haggadah, over the years before I learned the Sicha, this is like, where's this coming from? You know, and this is late in the Seder, you're already hungry, you sat already for a long time, and suddenly you're giving me a whole mathematics, it's really 10, no, it's really 40, because each one is 4, each one is 5. What's the relevance? So the Rebbe comes along and bases the Sicha, quotes from the Kalboy and other classics, that says that this is a very meaningful discussion. The introduction of this is that everything in the creation, we know from Rambam, is made up of 4 elements: Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer, fire, wind, dust, and water. Every single thing, even if you have water, the water in itself has the other 3 elements. Certainly a human being, they're all in there. It's brought in a Maimar of the Alter Rebbe that if you take a log of wood and you burn it, the element of fire within the wood goes up in the flame, the element of wind goes up in the smoke, the element of water goes also up in the smoke, there's some kind of moisture in smoke, and the element of dust is what's left over in the ashes. So you can almost see it. But this is the principle brought in Torah, and to a great degree science concurs with it, lahavdol. That these are the 4 elements that make up every single thing in creation. And then there's a 5th thing called Chomer Hiyuli, which in English, I believe it's translated as the primary core. Hiyuli apparently is a word that it's a concept that was coined by the Greek philosophers. And it's recognized, lahavdil, again by science as well. And Chassidus talks about it a lot and utilizes it a lot in understanding creation. And how did scientists see it, and what does it mean? That in addition to those 4 elements that put together, let's say that log, there's the actual existence of it. And that's not defined. Just the fact that it exists. You could say the 4 elements create something specific. It's a log, and it's not a piece of silver, and it's not water. It's this. It's defined. The core existence, the fact that it exists, is a common denominator really in the silver, in the wood, and in the water. Existence itself, and even science is recognizing, Greek philosophy, lahavdil, recognizes, and certainly Torah recognizes, that the Eibishter created existence, that itself is something of a chidush. The fact that something exists before what exists. So that would be my understanding of this Chomer Hiyuli. I'm going to, so the Rebbe wants to say that with this concept, we have every being has the final product. Then it has the 4 elements that put it together. And then it has this 5th element, which is the essence of it, the core. This, the Rebbe wants to say, will line up with the 3 opinions in the Haggadah. Rabbi Yosef Aglili says there are only 10 plagues, which really means each plague is 1. Because as the plagues struck Egypt only in the final product of Egypt, Egypt was struck, Egypt as it was, the final product. Rabbi Eliezer will say, no, it also struck the 4 elements. Rabbi Akiva will say it also struck the essence of Egypt. Let me pull it up in a spreadsheet, which I believe in this Sicha will be quite helpful. So here we go. So we have the 3 opinions. The 3 opinions. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, of how many plagues there were, 10, 40, and 50, column B. And the discussion is how deeply the plagues hit. column C, did it hit just the final product or the four elements or the core essence? And the Rebbe says, therefore, we know what was the purpose of the plagues? To smite Egypt, which means to break and destroy the negativity, the impurity, the tumah, the unholiness. So the question therefore becomes, how deep is the impurity of Egypt that it needs to be smitten? Is it just the final product, Egypt as it is, as it was, or Egypt was rotten to the elements or rotten to the core? My words, of course. And based on that, we respond with three different approaches of how deeply the makos, the plagues which were here to smite Egypt, the word makah means to hit, to fix, to correct, to undo its negativity. How deeply it had to hit. If each plague is just one, it's just the final product. If it's also four, it's all four elements. If it's five, it's also that core. I want to just suggest, because I teach this class also in my local community, and to try to make it help understand this concept of hiyuli a little more illustratively. So I used an example of a color, just because it's something we can relate to. Imagine there's a color, like look at the room that I'm sitting in, the room was painted. Let's assume the decorator decided it has to be a certain color, and that color wasn't available. So what did you do? You mixed four colors together, and you came up with this color. So within this color, there's four colors. You might know that there are four primary colors, and if you go to your printer, he'll present to you 4,000 colors because it's mixed and match, which is, I think, a little bit of a mushel of how the four elements can mix and match together, and you have any number of types of creations. So back to my paint. So there's four colors that created this color. So you now have three levels of how to look at this paint. There's the final product. It's this color. Give it a name, whatever you want. The final product. Then you have the four colors as they are mixed in. You can't really take them out. You can't find them, but they're clearly there. And on some level, they're still there, even though you can't take it apart. And then there is the concept of color. This is the main reason why I'm using this analogy. The concept of hiyuli is found in Torah, apparently, in the Ramban, on the early verses of the Torah, Bereshis Brother. What is the creation? Before the details of the 10 utterances. What is Bereshis Brother? What is the initial creation? Ramban talks about it, and he describes what we as Hasidim call Elam Habriya. It's the first step, it's the first potential that there should be concept of existence. And he describes it in that fashion. The very fact that something exists, to us believing Jews, that the whole world is a chidush yesh me'ayin. It's something that wasn't. It's a miracle of God that existence even exists. This is not so hard for us to understand. So let's come back to the analogy. I have a finished color. I know there's four colors that made up that color. But who created the concept of color? And that clearly exists. When God said, let there be color, it didn't have any specific color. It certainly didn't have a combination of colors, but already there existed the potential. And that is really the basis for everything, including the finished product that you're looking at here. You can translate this any existence. You know, you have a silver product. It's a beautiful candelabra. Then, so you have the final product, the silver. Then you have the four elements that are within it, which a good Kabbalist or even a good scientist, lahavdil, with a microscope can find that there are four elements. Today's science has taken the number four and multiplied it, but it's really based on the four elements. So it's not just silver. Silver is eish, ruach, mayim, and up, fire, wind, dust, and air. But then there is the concept of existence, or the concept of metal. There are probably many levels to it. And therefore, that is, when we're looking at a candelabra, you know, the salesman in the store sees a menorah. The scientist sees the four elements. You might say the chassid sees the very fact that it exists. That itself is a chiddush, an innovation, because existence of anything is a chiddush. And therefore, when you see something, there is its core existence, just the fact that it's here, before what is here. That's my understanding of the Siyuli, and I hope that is helpful and not confusing. So coming back here, so the Rebbe so far is borrowing from the Kolbe and from the Ritva and other classics who teach this concept. Of the machlekes of the three-way machlekes that we discussed in the Haggadah. Now here the Rebbe is coming in and adding and putting this all together and saying, wait a minute, if this three-way argument is three levels of how hard Egypt was hit, that means by definition it's three levels of how we see the impurity of Egypt. Because why is the purpose of the hitting? To correct the impurity, to break the impurity. Says the Rebbe, take a look at the prohibition of chametz. It's clear that the fact that we're not allowed to eat chametz on Pesach is because it's a reflection of Egypt, and whatever Egypt represents, that unholiness, and therefore we're not allowed to eat it. We find in the prohibition of chametz multiple levels, and here too there's going to be opinions. Whether you're not allowed to eat it, or you're also not allowed to have any benefit from it, or you're not even allowed to possess it. And the Rebbe is going to say, the Rebbe is going to teach us that these three correspond to these three levels. Remember, in Torah, especially when you learn Chassidus, and the way the Rebbe teaches us, that everything that is in Pnimis Torah, in Agada, in Midrashic writings, and Chassidic writings, and Kabbalistic writings, is mirrored in Halacha. It's all one Torah. The Rebbe doesn't see it, Chas v'Shalom, as four different Torahs, the four levels of Torah. It's one Torah. The Zohar describes Torah, the Pnimis, and the Nigla, the revealed and the hidden, as a body and a soul. They mirror perfectly. So this is an example where the Rebbe does that in the Sicha and says the fact that chametz is prohibited is because Egypt is no good among column D. And chametz somehow is an incarnation, a representation of Egypt, at least for those 8 days. And therefore, to what degree chametz is prohibited is to what degree Egypt is corrupt and unholy. By way of brief introduction, most things in Torah we find are prohibited to eat, like unkosher meat, roadkill, nevela, if it wasn't slaughtered properly. Then there are some things that are also prohibited to benefit from. An example is idolatrous stuff. Yayin nesach, wine that may be used for idolatry. Or let's say milk and meat, interestingly enough, is a higher level prohibition than just roadkill, unkosher meat. And you're not allowed to even derive benefit from it. And it's discussed as the Rebbe, what would be the difference? Why is it that certain things I'm not allowed to eat, but I'm allowed to derive benefit? The reason why you're not allowed to eat it, because it's unholy. It's klipa, right? How does Chassidus teach us that everything in the world lives from divine energy? And if you have something holy, it's divine energy that's holy. If you have something that is mundane, so it's more of a concealment, and you have something that's unholy, it is divine energy that is put into the direction of klipa, and it's unholy energy now. And the way to deal with it is to push it away. That's purpose. That's why it's created. So if something is unholy, let's take roadkill, nevela, unholy chicken that I buy in the supermarket, God forbid, that has no hechsher. How come I'm allowed to derive benefit and give it to my pet or my housekeeper? If it's unholy, which means I'm not allowed to eat it. Why? Because it's today, because it has a klipa in it. How come I'm allowed to derive benefit? What's the difference? So the Rebbe analyzes this. By the way, on the face of it, it's normally discussed and looked at as, well, if you eat it, you're ingesting it. You're just deriving benefit. You're giving it to your pet or to your non-Jewish neighbor or friend. At least it's not going inside of you. That's how it's normally looked at. The problem with that is that Rebbe doesn't suffice with that for two reasons. First of all, if that's the case, so how come when it comes to other things like the unkosher wine or milk and meat, I'm not allowed to derive benefit, I'm not taking it in. Plus, and this is the main way that Rebbe presents it in this Sicha, if something is unholy, if something is treif, it's klipa, it's, let's call it evil, it's an enemy of Hashem, of Elokus, of divinity, why do I want to have any benefit? How could I have any benefit? Who cares if I'm digesting it or not? I shouldn't want to touch it. So the Rebbe illuminates this in this Sicha and says that it has to do with how deep the impurity penetrated the item. Let's see. And the Rebbe says, based on this, we're going to understand all three opinions. Rabbi Aglili is of the opinion that you're not allowed to eat chametz and Pesach. You're allowed to benefit. This is a very unusual, it's an opinion just of Rabbi Aglili. You're allowed to benefit from chametz. But you're not allowed to eat it, because he holds Remember, what did we say? That the impurity of Egypt and hence chametz only permeate the final product. When you have a product, what are you eating? The final product. You're not eating the 4 elements. You can't eat the 4 elements. You can't eat dust and wind and air and fire. None of those things are edible. So when you say that something is only impure on its final product, the only prohibition required to stay away, to refrain from that impurity, is eating it. Parenthetically, possessing it is also biblically prohibited, but according to this opinion, we would say, as brought down in many commentaries, and the Rebbe applies it to Rabbi Yossi, we would say that it's prohibited as a safeguard. God forbid you come to eat it, because it's very bad if you eat it. This is Egypt. This is Yetzirah. So it's very bad if you eat it, and therefore we made a safeguard. But it's not that in concept it's terrible if it's in your house. It's terrible because Torah prohibited it as a safeguard lest you eat it. Proof is he even allowed to benefit from it. That's Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Eliezer says both eating and benefiting are proscribed by Torah because he holds, says the Rebbe is the one putting this together. He holds that the impurity of Egypt and hence the prohibition and the unholiness in chametz permeates not just the final product but also the 4 elements. Think about the 4 elements of something that's beyond what you can eat, as we said before. But the 4 elements still means you have something. You have a defined object. And therefore, if the object, almost so to speak, without its final form, is permeated with impurity, I can't have any benefit from it. Not just I can't eat it. This is how I see the logic. Not just I can't eat it because, and the Rebbe really says it, because eating, you can only eat a final product. You can't eat the 4 elements. None of them are edible. I mean, water is, but ultimately, elements are not edible. So if it's only about the final product, it's about the eating. But if it's about the 4 elements, that means, let's say, everything about this thing, before it's a final product, is unholy, I can't benefit from it. This thing is no good. Not just its final use. Its essence is no good. And that's the 4 products, the 4 elements. That's what makes up a thing. Here, too, though, we would say that the prohibition of possessing Vaera, Matzah, which is clearly a biblical prohibition, would also only be as a safeguard. Whereas Rabbi Akiva, says the Rebbe, he would hold that all 3 are biblically prohibited because it's problematic on all 3 levels, as we said, not only the final product, not only the 4 elements, but even the siyuli. Siyuli means the core being, almost like not what it is, but that it is, and therefore I can't even possess it. It's not just about eating it, which is the form, not only about possessing it, which is the object, even when it's formless, but about possessing the it before it's even a particular object. It's hard for us to understand that because we're not talking about anything defined yet. But that's how we would describe Hiyuli, and that's what Rabbi Akiva would say is the prohibition. So this is a beautiful map that the Rebbe is putting together. One of the beauties of this Sicha is not just that it illuminates the Haggadah and it connects Nigla and Chassidus, Nigla and Medrash, etc., the various levels of Torah study. But there are various points in the Sicha where the Rebbe shows that his approach is backed up with the Gemara. So in column D, the Rebbe comes up with this whole thing. And one of the things that backs it up from the Gemara is that Rabbi Yossi HaGlili actually holds that only eating is prohibited and not benefiting. So that is a very big support to this. And we're going to see now in column E a similar thing where the Rebbe is going to put everything into columns, so to speak. And again, it's being based on Talmudic clear opinions in the Talmud. And that is this. We know that there's a dispute about the method of getting rid of the chametz. And the sages, Rabbi Yehuda says you have to burn it. Ein bir chametz el sreifa. Again, because chametz is so bad that you not just eat it, you're not allowed to benefit, you're not even have it. So there's a mitzvah, bir chametz. And the only way, says Rabbi Yehuda, is to burn it. The sages say no. You could crumble it to the wind and throw it to the sea, and it's gone. Says the Rebbe, that what's the significance of this argument? It's not just the sages look to argue about everything else. There's a reason. There's a significance. Says the Rebbe, it would fit right in here. If you hold like Rabbi Eliezer, that chametz, that the chametz, the impurity is only on the product, not on the core essence. You throw it to the sea, there's no more product, there's no use. Maybe it exists somewhere under the sea and it's crumbled to the wind, but there's no use. It's not available. It's impossible to be available. And therefore, there's no product. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the impurity touched its core, not just the product, the existence, let's call it. And therefore, even that is needed. Rabbi Yossi doesn't have an opinion on this, but the Rebbe, I'm suggesting that Rabbi Yossi would say, just get rid of it. Perhaps I put that in parentheses. I don't know if you have to fill in that box. But the main point is that we have these two opinions. So the Rebbe wants to line up Rabbi Yehuda and the sages in another argument, seemingly unrelated, about chametz, the methods of getting rid of chametz. He wants to line it up with this discussion about how deep the impurity of Egypt and hence the prohibition of chametz is affected. So here there's another zinger that Rabbi Akiva happens to hold like Rabbi Yehuda in this argument. It's clearly stated. So this was an important point. Rabbi Akiva, it's clearly, the Rebbe in the footnote tells you where, if you want to find it. Rabbi Akiva clearly holds like this opinion, and therefore this further substantiates, if you will, the Rebbe's approach, the Rebbe's chidushim, the Rebbe's innovations here. Let's move on. In a footnote, the Rebbe brings another interesting argument. I want to just point out that I am skipping the beginning of Ois Hey of chapter 5 of the Sicha, where the Rebbe introduced another argument, because it's a little hard for me to fit it into my structure. It's a little bit gray, and I feel like it will confuse. But there, the Rebbe brings an additional argument in the Talmud. There's a way to split up this middle opinion that says that not only eating but also benefiting is prohibited. But there's two opinions in that itself that brought in the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. Some say that what type of benefiting is prescribed only if it brings to eating, which would mean like if you sell it and you have money, you can eat it. But if it's benefiting, but there's no monetary gain, for example, you're giving it to a stray dog, which means you have absolutely no financial benefit. There's no possibility of benefiting it to eat it because you're not getting any money or any benefit. You're not saving any money. That is sort of two opinions within Rabbi Eliezer itself, within that opinion itself. And the Rebbe wants to further say that too would depend on which level of the impurity is affected, which level of the thing is affected. Okay, I skipped it, but I just put it out there. So if someone wants to explore it further. But then in the footnote, the Rebbe is another one. I like to stick to the things that I can make very clear. And that is the Bavusta, the well-known argument between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. Chametz that a Jew owned, God forbid, on Pesach. He made a mistake, or he didn't clean it out, whatever it is, and he owns it. And then after Pesach, he realizes that he owned it. He forgot to sell it, he forgot to get rid of it. What do you do? Is it allowed or not allowed? Pesach is already over. So Rabbi Yehuda says it's prohibited, which of course that's the halacha we go by. And Rabbi Shimon says it's allowed. So here too, the Rebbe says, the Rebbe's signature style, connecting a legal halachic debate with the Kabbalistic spirituality behind it. It's not just they're all arguing just for the sake of arguing. There's a tremendous amount of depth, obviously, it's Torah. And the Rebbe puts it right into this context. If you hold, like Rabbi Eliezer, this opinion, that the object, the chametz, has unholiness, and even its four elements, which means so long as there's some form. You're speaking about this. Either you're speaking about the finished bread or the 7 layer, or you're speaking about the elements, I make it up, but at least you're speaking about this. You're not speaking about existence in the abstract. There's some form. If that's the case, when Pesach is over, it no longer has that form. And why not? The 7 layers is still here, but it's no longer chametz because Pesach is over. When Pesach is over, chametz is not prescribed. And therefore, when Pesach is over, Rabbi Shimon says you did a terrible thing, and maybe you have to tshuva. But the kakash cake that you have, the 7 layer, you can see what my favorite mezainis is, which I'm not allowed to eat. For me, it's prescribed the whole year round by my wife. But okay, I digress. So if I have this piece of bread after Pesach, I don't have chametz. I don't have the form of chametz because chametz is a Pesach concept. And therefore, when Pesach is over, you can eat it. Rabbi Yehuda says the chametz was prohibited on Pesach not just because it's bread, but that prohibition reached its core existence because it exists. And after Pesach, even though it's not halachically bread anymore with its negative connotation, but it still exists. And that's how deep the prohibition goes, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And here the Rebbe lines it up with, wants to say it's Rabbi Akiva. Again, here the Rebbe has somewhat of a basis from classic Torah, classic oral Torah, because Rabbi Yehuda obviously would line up with his own opinion in Kalami, which clearly lines up with Rabbi Akiva's opinion in Kalami, because Rabbi Akiva says it clearly in the Talmud. I got a kick out of the fact that the Rebbe, whenever the Rebbe makes a chiddush, so often you understand, it's substantiated by classics and by Torah, and therefore it makes it sweeter. Now we're going to go into the Chassidus side of the Sicha. So this is, I guess, the fun part. So the Rebbe says that we know that there are 4 exiles. Daled Golis. The question is, how do we count them? Really, there are 5. Take a look. Egypt, Assyria, Babylonia, Greek, and Rome. Mitzrayim, Asher, Bavel, Yavan, and Eder, which is the Golos that we're in now, which hopefully is finishing because it's too long. However, depends where you look. So the Rebbe says in most places, in Gemara and other places, it lists the 4. It doesn't include Mitzrayim in it. And there are some exceptions where it does, where it includes Mitzrayim. And some of the listings where it does include Mitzrayim, it will omit Ashur, which is sometimes called Elam. It doesn't matter. But the bottom line is that we find 2 counts, which is very interesting to us. We find sometimes where Egypt is part of the count, and sometimes it's not part of the count. And the Rebbe brings in a footnote that sometimes we find Egypt counted and all 5 are counted. Bottom line is, without getting into too much detail in that, because there's a lot to explore in it, in the Sicha and in the footnotes, the Rebbe says here we can start to explain it. We know that these 4 exiles will correspond to the 4 elements of creation, which are, if you will, created by and the 4 letters of Hashem's name. That's why there's 4 elements, because ultimately it comes from the 4 letters of Hashem's name. Everything comes from Elokus. But when these 4 elements become exiled in a negative, they now become the opposition to the 4 letters of Hashem's name. But there's a 5th level in Hashem's name, which is the Kodesh Shel Yud, not just Yud, K, Vav, and K, but the Yud has a little strichel on top, a little crown. And that becomes the 5th level. And in our context, that would be manifest, not just in the 4 elements, but in the Hiyuli, as we discussed now, this core essence. And the question becomes, do we or do we not count Egypt in the list? It depends if we see Egypt as hitting the core element or not. If we see it as just hitting the 4, if we see it as just hitting the 4 elements, so the Egypt is just the beginning of it, but primarily, I may have this wrong. It's possible that actually, the way I'm feeling it should say is this. We have to confirm this. That if we say only 4, Egypt becomes one of the four. So according to one of the counts, you don't have Assyria. Because this would go according to Rabbi Eliezer that only the four elements are affected by Egypt. And then it's played out through the others. The languages in Egypt is the beginning of all the exiles. Yeah, because it's the first of the elements. It's the Yud of the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Obviously the enemy of the Yud and the Yud Kei Vav Kei. But sort of a derivative of it, etc. Whereas if you hold that this Egypt is counted separate, which means it's not counted as the four, it's sort of the fifth. It's the Koitzer Yud, it's the enemy of the essence of Hashem's crown. So then that would go to this approach that it's the core essence beyond the four elements. Because the four letters of Hashem's name are the source of the four elements. The Koitzer Yud is the source of the Hiyuli within the world, and of the enemy, of the negativity within these four, etc. And therefore, this would explain this whole big conversation about what we do with the two different counts of the exiles. And then the Rebbe goes in talking about it on a personal level in Vaera. We know that the neshama has 5 levels. 4, let's call it more conscious, and then there's the essence. And this will correspond to the 4 elements. Right? You can see it right in front of you. The response to the 4 elements and to the essence, to the Yechida. What is the essence of a soul? Even an animal soul has an essence. Just the fact that it's a soul. The first 4 elements of the soul are very descriptive. Just like the 4 elements that are behind them. Eish, Ruach, Hamayim, Afar, fire, dust, air, and water. You have the behavior, you have emotion, you have intellect, you have willpower. All of these things are very definable. And every person has them. And obviously, like the 4 elements within every product, they mix and match on different quantities and different mixes, and every person is different. But then there is the fact that you're alive. There's nothing to be said about that. That is not describable. It is. And that's a good example, so to speak. Not that we fully understand what that means, but we can experience it. We know we're alive, even if we're not experiencing intellect or emotion or even willpower or action, which is behavior, which is the thought, speech, and action. Just the fact that we're alive. Think of a baby at a day old. It doesn't have any of these other things, but it knows it's alive. Or maybe that's what you feel when you wake up in the morning and you say Moidani before you have a chance to think. And that is the Hiyuli, the soul. It is. Not what it is. It's nothing yet. It's just is. That's life itself. And on the neshama side of it, all of these things represent service of Hashem. So the behavior means thought, speech, and action of Torah and mitzvahs. The emotion is love of Hashem, love of a Yid, etc. And Yiras Hashem, being afraid of violating Hashem, etc. And then the intellect is the mind that understands Torah. And willpower means beyond that. In the Sicha, the Rebbe uses the term Mesiras Nefesh. I'm totally dedicated. But then there is the essence. What is it? A Yid is one with Hashem. You can't describe it. It doesn't say anything. It's like Hiyuli. It's almost like the essence that we said before at the beginning of the conversation. It's just the object itself. The neshama of a Yid is a Yid, is Hashem. There's nothing more that can be said about it. So the question is, says the Rebbe, a fantastic thing here. That the whole idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Pesach Seder and everything is for us to experience personal redemption. I just want to put out there, I imagine most people are familiar with this, that this is the reason why there's 5 tefillos, 5 prayers on Yom Kippur, and there's 4 prayers on Yom Tov and Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, and only 3 prayers every day. That's for the reason of the 5 levels of the soul. Because most days we only access the 3 lowest levels of our neshama. We only experience behavior, emotion, and intellect of our neshama. Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Yom Tov, we hit the willpower. There's the neshama is more alive, so to speak. Somehow there's a natural feeling of connection. And Yom Kippur, with the last tefillah of Ne'ilah, we feel that place. We feel consciously or unconsciously, but we experience, if you will, in a more revealed way, that essential bar. Okay. The Rebbe says now that this becomes sort of the lesson from the Sicha, or the Vaera, that since Yetzias Mitzrayim and Pesach and the prohibition and all of the above comments is about overcoming my own Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means limitation. We all have limitation by nature, by nurture, by our personalities, by what have you. And the goal of a Yid is to try to break out and live like a Yid without the limitations of negativity and bad stuff. So the question is, on what levels do we require Yetzias Mitzrayim? I'm suggesting that a Rabbi Yossi Aglili's approach would be just behavior. It doesn't say it in the Sicha because the Rebbe doesn't line it up, this third opinion. But perhaps Rabbi Yossi Aglili would take the model from Tanya, just do it. Just do the right thing and that's it. Leave it alone. Don't worry about what's happening beyond that. Maybe. But Rabbi Eliezer would say, you got to fix all four levels of your neshama because you got to fix all four elements. The Mitzrayim permeated your animal soul, your inner Pharaoh, and all these things on all four levels. It's not enough just to make sure you don't fall into wrong behaviors, but you got to protect yourself from negative emotions and from negative intellectual things and the limitations that the Rebbe in the Sicha gives examples. Emotionally means I could live in a way, I could be doing all the mitzvahs and living like a Chassidish Yid, but I'm very impressed what people think of me. And that is an emotional impediment. That is a Mitzrayim. It's human nature. That's why the first line of Shulchan Aruch is not to take that into account, because it's very hard. A person can be a good Yid on many levels, but at the end of the day, human nature is we're affected by people's opinions of us. And the Rebbe says, Yetzias Mitzrayim demands of us to try to get past that. Good luck. But that is part of the Avodah V'Chassid. And then the intellect, where a person's intellect becomes an impediment because if he doesn't understand something in Torah, it's not important to him. That's terrible. He may still embrace it because that's what Torah says, but he's in Mitzrayim. His mind becomes, so to speak, his Pharaoh, becomes a limiting factor, because their mind by definition is limited. And then even willpower. He has a limitation on that. He's lacking the ability to dedicate himself completely, what the Rebbe calls it, Mesiras Nefesh. And you have to break out of that. But then there is the essence. So the Rebbe says, do we have to do Yetzias Mitzrayim on the essence? The essence is perfect. So the Rebbe says, depends who you are. And this becomes a difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is a tzaddik. He's the son of Hyrcanus, who himself was a Talmid Chacham, and he comes from prodigy of Jewish people. And therefore, the essence of a Yid is always holy. There's no need to fix it. You only have to fix it on the four levels. However, give me 5 minutes. However, Rabbi Akiva, he says that he also on this fifth level, and the reason is, says the Rebbe, because he was a son of converts, he's a descendant of converts, and therefore, even on the essential level, it needs to be transformed. It needs transformation. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva said, no, all five. You got to change the Yechida, so to speak, which I guess that's what a convert does. He's a newborn child. He changes his essence. The Rebbe explains and describes it in the Sicha and also in the footnotes that even on the face of it, this looks like Rabbi Akiva is behind. He's dealing with a negative because he's a convert, and therefore he needs this transformation. But really, it brings a net positive, because ultimately, that it can still break out of that limitation too. And about the Rebbe says that the Ger or the Baal Tshuva, the famous thing that the Baal Tshuva, he is coming and fighting a negative. In a way, he can accomplish a greater passion for love for Hashem than a tzaddik, because he has to overcome negativity. And therefore, this can be a net positive. So that becomes how the Rebbe finishes the Sicha. I want to suggest what this could mean to us. Somebody sent me a voice note, a fellow shliach who's learning the Sicha, maybe teaching the Sicha, and he says, I don't understand. We learn in Tanya that we're supposed to be a Beinoni. Our job is to just thought, speech, and action. That's not really what a Beinoni is, but basically that's what we're taught, thought, speech, and action. And here the Rebbe is talking about correcting not only our behavior, but our emotion, our intellect, our willpower, and even our yechida. Why is the Rebbe telling us this? It can't just be for academic purposes. What's the takeaway? So I don't know, but here's going to be my suggestion, okay? Here's my suggestion, take it or leave it. That, yes, the Rebbe's approach and the famous mimer of the Rebbe, Yishlach Yeshua, that in our generation, it's all about Kabbalah Sale, Maisa B'Payel, do the right thing, would be, I guess, like Rabbi Shalom, just do it. Just say no. And the other 4 levels, the other 3 levels, we're not so capable of it. However, the Rebbe says many times in Chassidus that in the essential bond, we are connected. Sometimes a simple foot soldier who just does what Hashem wants with total dedication, we access a place in the essence that other generations, which were loftier and more sophisticated, did not access. So I'm suggesting that this is what the Rebbe wants in the Sicha in Vaera. I think one of the things, obviously, what the Rebbe wanted from our generation, the Rebbe didn't bother us so much with these 3 middle levels: emotion, intellect, and willpower. Obviously, you have to try to use them to the service of Hashem, but the Rebbe's main focus was make sure your behavior is okay. But you might say, if you think about it, the Rebbe looked at us as Rabbi Akivas. We're not tzaddikim, we're far from it. And said that we have an edge that we could, on our low level, accomplish what Rabbi Akiva accomplished on his high level. This is filled in the Sichas, how the lowest levels of love of Hashem mirror the highest, the lowest levels of tshuva mirror the highest. So here's how I'm seeing this takeaway. This is what it said to me, that our commitment, Kabbalah said, simple foot soldier, doing Torah mitzvahs, we can, in a sense, transform our essence. BC, because the essence is the definition of the very recognition of self. And the Rebbe demands of our generation that while I don't expect you to change your midas and your emotion and your intellect and all that, but I expect you to be a shliach. The Rebbe said our whole generation is a shliach. A shliach means I don't belong to myself, I belong to somebody else. That is, in a sense, an objection to the core ego, to the core essence. And although it's not something that we have developed through Avodas HaTefillah and through very high levels of appreciation, because we're not capable of that, but through our very commitment that we follow commands about whatever. This is what we have to do. Mitzayim, Rambam, learning, whatever it is. That very definition, a soldier in a way is the highest level. And therefore we almost don't belong to ourselves. We gave ourselves away, at least on a practical level. And in a sense, that's the Yechida. We had a conversation here last Shabbos in our shul that one of the lessons of Parsha Shemos can mean a name in the negative way. Everybody's looking for a name for themselves. Everybody wants to go down in history. Everyone wants to know that they're going to be remembered. It's human nature to worry, how am I going to be remembered? Who's going to know about me in 50 years, 100 years? Only 1 in 10,000 people is remembered by history. And the human ego is worrying about it. I don't know if Chassidish or Yidden are worrying about it, but human beings basically worry. I'm going to be irrelevant. The greatest fear is irrelevance. And so my message to my congregation was that Shemos, this desire for a name, for a recognition, for something, is what brings us into Egypt. Shemos b'nei Yisrael abayim Mitzrayim. Whereas the way to be is like Moshe Rabbeinu in the Parsha. He's not busy with his name, he's busy doing. He's saving this one, he's saving that one, he's breaking up a fight, he's saving the daughters of Yisrael, etc., etc. This name for a name, but it's human nature. I want to know that I matter. I don't want to just be a passing shadow. The answer is that a Yid and a Neshama, really any human being, which is an image of Hashem, is like a ray of light from the sun. So by allegory, if you say Hashem is the sun and you're a ray of light, the ray of light doesn't need to go make a name for itself. It's busy doing its job. It's just transparent in the light of the sun. It's not it's sun. I said to the people, you don't have to worry about shame, your name. You are Hashem. On the virtue of your Neshama, you're part of Hashem, and that's eternal, etc. So here I'm illustrating how I see it, how behavior and essence go together. When a Yid in this simple generation of people, Deir Shvi, follows the Rebbe's instructions, which is pull the trigger, go, do what you got to do, stay away from Vaera and Chassidus and Rambam and Mivtzayim, and just do. We're just foot soldiers. We have bypassed the 3 middle levels, but in a way we're capable of touching and tasting that concept of Rabbi Akiva's overhaul of the essence, because I've, so to speak, given away my essence. Because the Rebbe says in the Sicha that because I've given away my identity. This is how I'm seeing it. Again, this is just a personal takeaway that I feel like I want to share, because I think that the Rebbe wants that a Sicha should have relevance. And I think what I'm saying may not be the ultimate truth, but I think it's true. Okay.